347-237-4360. Again, that's 347-237-4360. We'd love to hear from you. If tonight's show runs over 90 minutes and the live feed gets cut off, you can listen to the remaining portion of the show by downloading it from our archives. Tonight's guest is from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and founded the Michigan Upper Peninsula Bigfoot Organization in 2005. She's an accomplished author and Bigfoot field researcher who became interested in paranormal activity when she had a UFO sighting as a teenager. Some of the books she's written would include The Hunt for Bigfoot, Backyard Bigfoot, and Strange Michigan, which she co-authored with Linda S. Godfrey. She has a master's degree in library science, so it goes without saying that research comes naturally to her. As a recognized Bigfoot expert, she's been interviewed by big city newspapers, TV news reporters, and drive time talk radio hosts. Most recently, she was a guest on the G. Gordon Liddy Show. At this point, I'd like to welcome our guest to the campfire. That would be Lisa A. Shiel. Lisa, thanks for joining us tonight. How are you?
I'm good.
Thanks for coming.
Great to have you on, Lisa.
Thank you.
Definitely. Well, jumping right in, Lisa, I was wondering, please tell our listeners about the Michigan Upper Peninsula Bigfoot Organization.
Well, actually, it's not around anymore.
It's not?
No, I changed the name to Backyard Phenomena Investigations, and then I sort of just folded that into my Backyard Phenomena blog because I just wanted to focus on my writing, and so I didn't really have time to devote to investigating sightings and that stuff, although I'm still very interested in all of that.
So that's the same reason why you stopped. You were the head of MUFON for a few years. That's the same reason why you decided to stop doing that as well, correct?
Right. It took up a lot of time, and I'd rather be working on my writing because that's what I am first and foremost, as a writer.
Uh-huh. What made you decide to create that organization?
Well, I saw that there wasn't really a group in the UP that was actively investigating Bigfoot, so I thought I would start one myself, and I had quite a few sightings reported to me while I was doing that, so it was interesting.
Oh, interesting. Shane?
Oh, Lisa, I was looking at, I noticed I've been kind of looking at some of the things that you've done over the years, and I have to say I'm kind of curious about one in particular. Let me go back to this here. The true story of stick signs and UFOs and Sasquatch. Could you kind of explain? I know some people might be a little touchy on the comparisons or the connection with the two. Could you kind of explain that a little bit?
Right, that's my book, Backyard Bigfoot, where I talk about that. It's mainly about my personal experiences with finding stick signs, which are formations of sticks that are in definite patterns, and they're along trails and quite often out in the open, not under trees. So it's not as if they just blew off a tree. And in fact, this summer I hardly found any, and this was a very windy summer, so if they were being blown off trees into these formations, you would have thought I found a lot of them this year. But the opposite was true. And I found them in cross formations. I found arrow shapes and various other things, and that's all documented in photographs in the book. And I also talk about the UFO connection because I believe there is a connection. And it doesn't really bother me when some of the touchy people you mentioned get a little touchy about it because I'm used to that.
So what exactly, I mean, what was the one thing that you learned or found that you feel there is a connection? Is there just one thing, or is it just groups of things?
Well, it's the whole body of evidence. There have been sightings of Bigfoot and UFOs together. There have been a number of places that are hot spots for both kinds of activity. Like one particular small area will have Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings, maybe not simultaneously, but close enough together that it makes you think, I wonder if there is some kind of connection here.
Interesting. Do you now? I'm assuming you now, correct me if I'm wrong, that you don't think Bigfoot's an actual alien, or am I wrong on that assumption?
No, I think they're probably born and bred here, but they have some kind of connection to the UFOs. I suspect that aliens or whoever is piloting the UFOs have had some kind of influence on life on Earth, perhaps creating different kinds of life in some kind of experiment, and maybe Bigfoot is part of that. Yeah, and that's basically how I look at it.
Did you have any questions, Vic?
If it is a fact that aliens brought Bigfoot creatures to our planet, Lisa, or maybe engineered them here, what do you think might have been their motivation for doing that?
Oh, it could be they wanted some creatures to do the heavy lifting for them, or maybe it's like their zoo here on Earth. Really, who knows if you're talking about alien beings, what their motivations would be. We'd have to assume they would think like us, but that might not be a correct assumption. They might not think the way we do.
Mm-hmm. That's something that I've put a lot of thought into myself. You don't have to listen very long to hear the mention of a possible connection between UFOs and Bigfoot creatures. Like I said, that's something I've put a lot of thought into, and a lot of people say it's just too far-fetched that there would be a connection, but it is a very unusual phenomenon, you have to admit, to have a potentially, 10-foot-tall bipedal creature that's unknown stalking the forests around the neighborhoods that we live in as well. So I'm not saying that I do believe that there is a definite connection between UFOs and Bigfoot. I'm just saying that I'm keeping my mind open on that possibility, because with all the crazy things that seem to be true out there, who's to say that that also is not true? It's just hard to be closed-minded. For someone who's never actually seen a Bigfoot, it would kind of be hypocritical on my part, I think, to believe in Bigfoot, even though there is just a tremendous amount of good evidence to prove that they're out there. I think it would be kind of hypocritical on my part to definitely believe that Bigfoot creatures are out there, but to totally rule out the possibility that there might be a connection between UFOs and Bigfoot creatures. Follow me?
Right, yeah. And I never tell people to believe this because I believe it. I just put the evidence out there that I have seen and discuss it, and it's up to everybody else to make up their own minds.
Mm-hmm. I know you said you saw a UFO when you were a teenager, but have you ever seen a Bigfoot?
I've got a glimpse of what I think was one. I was outside of my house. I live in the woods, and there's hardly anybody around out here. And I had noticed some ravens overhead circling around, making a lot of noise. And I looked off into the woods, just at the edge of a clearing further into the woods, so there was sunlight behind it. And I saw this tall, dark figure, and it kind of turned sideways and disappeared behind a tree. And it was too tall to be a bear, and it was definitely not a deer. I'm very familiar with the wildlife around here, so I think it was a Bigfoot, but I can't say absolutely for certain that's what it was. Mm-hmm. But that's about the best glimpse I've had.
Have you, during times that you've been out there, have you experienced a lot of vocalizations from them?
I have heard some whooping sounds. There was one night I heard one very close, and then there were some other ones kind of answering it further in the distance. So I have heard those kind of noises.
Now, getting back to the connection with Bigfoot and UFOs. Now, I've pondered the idea, because I know I've spoken some time ago briefly with Stanton Friedman. I think I pronounced that right. And there was, I know he had mentioned that there was a very small number of where he's had reports where they were in the general vicinity. But my opinion on that wasn't so much that I didn't think it was possible, but more, I often thought that, is it possible, maybe it isn't so much that they're connected, but maybe if, in fact, we have, because you hear people being abducted all the time, but maybe it isn't so much that they're connected, but maybe they're coming down here and they see these large hairy bipeds running around, and maybe they're taking them to do tests on, like apparently people are claiming they're being abducted. So maybe it isn't so much a connection; they're just using them for testing. How would you feel about, or what is your opinion on that?
Well, sure, it's possible. I mean, the truth is we don't know much of anything about Bigfoot or UFOs, so it's all opinions and guesswork. So, that's just as likely as anything else.
On average, Lisa, when you were with MUPBO, how many eyewitnesses per year did you interview?
Well, not as many as the bigger groups, obviously. It was a small group that mainly consisted of me and a few other people who got involved later on. It wasn't very many. I think total it was maybe 20 or 30 in the whole time I was running the group, because I wasn't, one of the high-profile people. So I just took whatever came in. So that I would say it was about 20 or 30 people.
Mm-hmm. That has to be a lot of fun, interviewing eyewitnesses. Is that something that you really enjoyed, or?
Yeah, I always liked talking to the witnesses, and I had talked to a witness who saw a lake serpent, and I talked to people who saw UFOs, and of course people who saw Bigfoot. So it was a wide range of people, and it was always very interesting talking to them.
Mm-hmm. Would you rather be out in the woods researching or interviewing eyewitnesses?
Well, I always like research, so, but I like talking to the witnesses too, so I don't know that I could pick.
Uh-huh. Shane?
Oh, no, I was curious. Have you had any, I know there was a recording or project that was going on, a Michigan recording project. Have you had any contact with that or any involvement with that at all?
No, I don't have anything to do with that.
Oh, okay. All right. Do you have any other questions, Vic?
Yeah, Lisa, our listeners love hearing about Bigfoot encounters. Have you heard about any recent encounters in your neck of the woods that you can share with them?
I haven't heard anything recently. Nothing that's made the papers, nothing anybody's told me. Most of the sightings that were reported to me when I was doing that happened, years earlier, and were not real recent, because it seems like people are kind of reticent to report things. They don't want to be made fun of, and they're not really sure what they saw, so it takes them a while to get up the nerve to tell somebody. And in all the time I've lived here, I have yet to see anything like that reported in the newspapers.
Uh-huh.
I don't think people are that willing to go public with it like that.
That's a shame.
But my mother actually had a sighting recently.
Oh, really? Tell us about that.
She was outside riding her horse in the daytime, and she looked off into the woods and saw a white creature, a tall white creature that walked behind another tree. She saw it take a couple steps, so she was sure it wasn't a deer or anything. Obviously, being white, it wasn't likely to be a deer or a bear. So she thinks it probably was a Bigfoot because there isn't much else it could have been.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's funny you mention that because Shane actually had a similar encounter when he was horseback riding years ago.
Really?
Sure did.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just asking if you could tell her about it.
Yeah, I had a number of years ago up in the northeastern part of Wisconsin, in Vilas County area, I actually had one that seemed to be quite interested in me and paralleled me and my horse. Kept up pace with my horse the entire time, and when I estimated his size or his height, my horse was 17.5 hands tall. I estimated he was at least a foot taller than my horse was, and he kept pace, just right along parallel the entire way as I was heading back to the stable. So it's within, the area was in, is probably, I'd say, probably 40-minute drive from the border of Michigan and Wisconsin.
That is a strange encounter. Now, Lisa, I've got a question for you, that I know you've never been asked before. How could Bigfoot exist in the woods of the Keweenaw Peninsula, where you live, when the woods are teeming with people such as foresters and DNR conservation officers?
Actually, I have heard that question before.
Oh, really? Had no idea.
Somebody asked me that. I was giving a talk last year, I think it was, and somebody asked me that, someone who's obviously skeptical about Bigfoot. So I did a little research after that just to see, because I'm a librarian, so I have to find out the facts. And I discovered that the Keweenaw Peninsula, it's not a really huge peninsula. If you look on a map, you look at the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, you'll see this little finger sticking up off the one end, and that's the Keweenaw. And it's actually separated in the middle. There's a canal that separates it, so the top half is actually basically an island. But of course, in the wintertime, the canal freezes over, so animals could get back and forth across there. And there are not people teeming in the woods all the time. This person who asked me this actually suggested that there were DNR officers and foresters out there covering every inch of the woods every day. So there couldn't possibly be Bigfoot there. But in fact, there are only 2 DNR officers for all of the northern half of the Keweenaw Peninsula. So I rather doubt they're out there walking every inch of the woods every day.
That is ridiculous.
And I know of a few foresters who might be out there, but they're not out there every day either. And they're not walking every inch of the woods. They go out there to look at a particular area to see what trees are there, that might be harvested. So there's not people out there every minute of every day. And there aren't a lot of people who live way out in the woods here. So, yeah, it's just not teeming with people who would see the Bigfoot if they were there.
Shane?
Getting back to now the Upper Peninsula. Now, how many sightings have you documented in just that area alone?
I've got probably a dozen at least. I haven't actually counted them. I've got a list of them, but I haven't stopped to count them. But there's probably a dozen, maybe a few more than that, that are just Bigfoot. And they come from all over the UP. So it's not one particular area. It seems to be just in general across the UP that these things happen. Like I have some from the Michigan-Wisconsin border by Norway, which is a little town over there, and some from farther over.
Now, with the ones that you've documented yourself, would you, in your opinion, would you say there's any one hot spot, if you will, in the UP, or would you say just sparse or scattered all over?
Mainly it's scattered all over. I have a couple from the Norway area, but other ones are kind of spread out. So it doesn't seem to be one particular area.
Okay. Do you have any other questions, Rick?
Yes, Lisa. Since you're not running the organization any longer, how much time do you get to spend out in the field researching anymore?
Well, I live in my research area. I'm out there, anytime I'm out for a walk, I'm looking for anything that might be a stick sign or possible footprints. So I'm always keeping an eye out for things. And because I live here, I know what's supposed to be there and what's out of place and what's unusual because I walk through there every day.
Oh, I see. Please tell our listeners about the books you've written regarding Bigfoot.
Well, the first one I wrote was actually a novel. It was an adventure story, really, about Bigfoot, about people going out, looking for Bigfoot, trying to figure out what they are. So that was the first Bigfoot-related book I wrote. And the second one is Backyard Bigfoot, which is nonfiction. It's mainly about my personal experiences with the stick signs. But I also talk about evolution a little in that book and how it might relate to Bigfoot, and about the UFO connection and some of the ancient artwork that might depict Bigfoot. So there's quite a range of topics in that book.
What led you to write those books?
I wrote the novel, actually, because my mother suggested it.
Oh, really?
Because we were both interested in all those kinds of strange things, Bigfoot and UFOs and anything like that. So I decided to write the book, and that's when I started really doing intensive research into the topic and reading a lot of books, not just about Bigfoot, but also about evolution. So that's when I really started doing the research, and then I did a lot more, of course, for Backyard Bigfoot, and collated all my experiences and all my stick sign photos to include in there.
Oh, I see. Shane?
Oh, go carry on.
Oh, okay. Please talk about the double standard you say exists with regards to Bigfoot research, Lisa.
Right, well, I've talked about that quite a bit on my blog. It's where Bigfoot researchers will go out in the woods, and every time they go out there, they say they find footprints, or they see Bigfoot or hear a Bigfoot. But if a witness comes up and says that they've had more than one encounter, then they're just dismissed. They're obviously a crackpot who just wants attention. So that's the double standard, that Bigfoot researchers can have multiple encounters, but not the witnesses who aren't researchers.
Kind of frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, it just seems a little hypocritical to me to be saying that you have sightings all the time, but nobody else can.
Uh-huh. What really gets me is how the same amount of evidence that it would take to actually give a person, a convicted killer, the death penalty, is just brushed aside with regards to these creatures. See what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, the scientific establishment will not accept any of the evidence, even when an expert scientist, reviews it and analyzes it, they still won't accept it.
Pretty ridiculous.
Yep.
No, Lisa. No, I don't. I'm not sure if you've only researched in the UP. Excuse me. Has there ever been another area that you've had an opportunity to research in? And if you have, could you give your opinions on some of the similarities or the differences, if you will?
Well, I only collected other people's sightings here in Michigan, but I had some of my experiences in Texas, too. In fact, it all started down there when I started finding stick signs, and I found a footprint and heard some noises. And then when I moved up here, it continued, or started again here. So I've had my own experiences in two different places, but I've only talked to witnesses since I've been up in Michigan, although some of the witnesses had their experiences in other places, like Tennessee and Oregon and places like that.
It looks like we have a caller with a question or questions for you, Lisa. Caller, you're on the air.
Oh, hey, Shane and Vic. It's Elusive One. How you guys doing this evening?
Hey, good news.
Hey, Abe, how you doing?
Doing good. Lisa, good to hear. Correct me if I'm wrong, but were you on Steve Abney's show at all in the past?
Maybe. It's hard to remember which ones I've been on.
I think I
was on that show.
Yeah, I recall hearing you on there with Steve and Mary, Dallas Gilbert.
Oh,
maybe
right, yes. Yeah,
Kiwani.
I remember now, yep.
Okay. I thought I heard you talking before. In your research area, you say it's your own backyard, and I think I've actually talked to you about this on Steve's show, but I don't recall. But as far as the tree formations go and the different types, could you kind of enlighten us as far as your opinion on what the different types could possibly mean, such as X formations, bends and bowls, some of the pointers, the piled ups, and things to that effect?
Well, mainly I have dealt with the stick signs, which are on the ground.
Okay.
I found a few things where larger sticks were propped up across a trail in an X, but most of the ones that I write about and have found have been on the ground. They're smaller sticks, maybe a foot long at most, and they're on the ground in various formations. And it seems like some kind of trail marking maybe, or some kind of communication perhaps, because I have created my own little signs and left them out there and had them changed, had them moved, which seems like a response to what I put there.
I'm sorry. Could you explain, because that's I'm kind of interested in that. You say they've been changed. Could you explain how they've been changed?
Right. Well, there have been several instances where I made a sign in a particular shape, and then it would disappear by the next day. And a couple days later, the same sticks would show up in a slightly different place, or sometimes in the exact same spot, and they'd be in a different formation.
And you're pretty sure that they were the same sticks?
Right, because they'd be distinctive sticks that were obviously the same. Sometimes they would have been changed the very next day, and it was in the same spot.
Interesting.
And how long have you been so-called being a Bigfoot researcher? How long have you been researching for, I guess, is the answer to the question.
I guess it would be about 4 years now that I've specifically been a Bigfoot researcher. Of course, I've been reading about it and doing that kind of research on it for a lot longer than that. But I first talked to witnesses about 4 years ago, and that's about the time I published Backyard Bigfoot, which has all my experiences in it.
How big is your research area?
Well, I live on 40 acres, but I'm surrounded by a lot of vacant land beyond that, so there's a whole big area of wilderness out there that anything could be wandering around on.
Now, is it correct that you live actually on the Upper Peninsula?
Right.
Okay.
The Keweenaw Peninsula, which sticks up from the top of the Upper Peninsula.
And how, in mileage-wise, how big would you say that is in square miles or in length?
Oh, I don't really know offhand.
Okay.
The Upper Peninsula is bigger than the Keweenaw Peninsula. If you look on a map, you can see the Upper Peninsula and see how big it is in relation to the surrounding areas. But there's a lot of uninhabited wilderness up here.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I don't want to take it.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's after you.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, after you. Go ahead, Shane.
Oh, Lisa, out of curiosity, now, what drew you to do the work or the co-authoring with Linda Godfrey? What was it that drew you to that?
Well, she had invited me to co-write a book with her, and I had seen Weird Michigan, which was her previous book, and I liked it, so I wanted to be a part of the second book. So that's how I got involved in it. And I'm here in Michigan, so it was kind of a natural thing for me to want to do.
Now, did you ever have an opportunity to get out and research with her, or is this something you just kind of put together from your own experiences?
My part of Strange Michigan, you mean?
Yeah.
I drove around in the UP and down through the northern part of the Lower Peninsula looking at stuff and finding stuff to write about. And I did a lot of research online by getting in touch with people who could help me get more information. And it was a real fun, interesting process to find some of the unusual things that made it into the book.
Okay. You had another question, Vic?
I know you've been following the recent hair braiding incidents that were reported in the UK, Lisa. What are your thoughts on the whole phenomenon, since this is a commonly reported occurrence?
Well, it has to do with horses, their manes being braided in these intricate patterns, and I also talk about that in Backyard Bigfoot because I had some experiences with that too, where my horses would turn up with these braids that would quite often consist of 3 strands that were interwoven in a very complex way that was very hard to get undone. And I've lived around horses just about my whole life, and I had never seen anything like this until about 5-6 years ago. And then recently, I read an article, in fact, it was just a couple days ago, about in the UK, people have been finding their horses' manes braided in the same way. In fact, it mentioned 3 strands, which is just like what was in the ones I've seen. And of course, the people don't know what's doing it or who's doing it, and the police decided that it must be pagan witches or something. Some people out there sneaking around, except that they're doing it overnight when there are big, nasty storms going on. Which seems like, why would people, no matter how religious they are, want to be out there doing that in those kind of conditions? But nobody has ever seen who's doing it there. And it's the same thing with the legends of mane braiding that go back quite a ways. There are legends from different parts of the world that talk about some kind of creatures braiding the manes of horses overnight. And in fact, I just recently read legend from here in the UP where there were a lot of French Canadians that came to the UP back in the 19th century, and they brought with them these legends of little creatures who they thought braided horses' manes overnight. So I found that very interesting, since I have had my horses' manes get braided up here.
That is interesting. You're listening to Campfire Shadows. Our guest tonight is Lisa A. Shiel, a Bigfoot researcher and author from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you'd like to call in and ask Lisa a question, the call-in number is 347-237-4360. Again, that's 347-237-4360. Lisa, tell us about the article you wrote regarding the top 5 controversies of Bigfoot research.
Well, I wrote that a while ago on my Backyard Phenomena blog. I just listed the 5 things that seem to cause the most arguments and tension and annoyance among Bigfoot researchers, things that the so-called flesh and blood people don't like to talk about because it might suggest Bigfoot is something other than a giant ape. or it's things that they just don't want to talk about publicly because it might make them look bad. So one of them is sexism, the fact that there aren't that many female researchers who get the media attention. One I can think of is they had a Monster Quest episode with female Bigfoot researchers. That was about the first time that I saw a documentary that focused on women as researchers. Most of the shows are about men, and that's who you hear about. Most of the books are written by men. But there seem to be some women writing books now, so hopefully that will change. But that's one thing that nobody really likes to talk about because, of course, all the men don't want to say that there's any problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
And another one is that people don't like the word belief. They don't want to say they believe in Bigfoot, which is silly because to believe is really just to be convinced by the evidence. I mean, there is religious belief, which is different, but general belief is just being convinced by the evidence. So this allergic reaction to the word belief is rather silly to me, because if you don't like the word belief, it probably just means you don't really know what it means. And it's rather silly to so staunchly avoid it that you'll use any long-winded alternative statement than to say that you believe in Bigfoot. Something like, I think the evidence is solid that Bigfoot is a real creature, instead of just saying, I believe Bigfoot is real. It's much quicker to say it that way. And another similar thing is the word paranormal, that a lot of people don't want to say that Bigfoot is paranormal. But even if you think Bigfoot is just a giant ape, it is paranormal, because paranormal just means that science can't explain it, and since the scientific establishment won't look at the issue, they can't explain it. Therefore, it is paranormal. And it's just kind of silly, I think, to get so caught up on words and what you think they mean or what you think the connotations are, instead of just using the words that everyone knows, the general public knows, and they will know what you mean if you say, I believe Bigfoot is real. They won't think that you're worshiping Bigfoot in a little shrine in your living room or something. And, of course, the other two main controversies are the UFOs and the witnesses who claim to have repeated encounters.
Lisa, I have a question. Now, I don't know if you've encountered or experienced this. I've noticed with many religious groups, if you will, seem to have like set in their mind that the Bigfoot, the whole Bigfoot phenomena, goes against certain religious beliefs, and that I don't know, I guess it's evil to think that they're real or something. I'm not exactly sure. What is your opinion on why do you think that they have such an issue with the whole idea of Bigfoot?
Well, I haven't personally encountered any people who feel that way. I know a lot of people who have different levels of religious beliefs, and I haven't met any who have a real problem with that. So I can't really say that I have much knowledge of that, because the people I've encountered haven't expressed any problems with it as far as it relates to religion.
Now, another question I have too. Now, historically speaking, and now I've read a lot of older books and a lot of transcripts, and I know I've heard people say that, they've had their ideas of where Bigfoot fits in with us or not with us, either way. Historically, what is? Do you have any opinion on them as far as our history, our natural history goes?
Well, I think Bigfoot is probably some kind of hominid, hominids being the supposed ancestors of humans, and hominids are all bipedal. The idea that the ancient hominids had no hair on their bodies, or were basically hairless the way we are. We have a little bit of hair, but nothing that you can really see, except on some people. But the idea that they were hairless is really just based on the assumption that they are our ancestors, direct ancestors, and so therefore they couldn't have had hair because we don't have hair. But we don't really have any evidence of that, because all we have left of them is their bones. So for all we know, they did have hair all over their bodies. And when you look at the skulls of the ancient hominids and some of the artistic reconstructions that have been done depicting what they might have looked like in life, they look very much like Bigfoot. They have the brow ridges and stocky faces, and they look a lot more like Bigfoot than they look like us.
Do you have any other questions, Vic?
I do. There was a question that Billy Joe asked a while back. Did you get that one?
Yeah, I was going to get to this.
Okay. My question could wait.
Oh, go ahead.
No problem. Yeah, my question could wait until after you ask that question that Billy has.
Okay. Yeah, my chat's acting up a little funny on me, so you got to kind of forgive me here.
Oh, that's no problem.
There was a question from Billy Joe in the chat for you, Lisa. Now, I don't know if this is referring to recent or not, but have you found tracks in the snow whether recent or do you get a lot of reports of tracks?
I have had some people who said they found what they thought was tracks in the snow, and I had a couple of years ago found some that might have been, but when they're in the snow, they're usually not very clear, so it's hard to tell for sure. But there could have been some in the snow.
So I think we have one.
Now, back to the lineage topic, Lisa, what are your thoughts on the possibility of there being a connection between Neanderthals and Bigfoot creatures?
Right, well, there could be. As I said, the hominids like Neanderthals and Homo erectus, they look a lot more like Bigfoot than they do us. And in fact, the hominid called Homo heidelbergensis had very stocky, thick bones, and they are thought to have been tall, too. So that sounds more like Bigfoot to me than it does like an ancestor of modern humans. And Neanderthals could fit in there, too. The idea that all these ancient hominids were different species is really just based on what they look like and the fact that everybody wants to discover a new species. You know, nobody wants to say, I found some more bones of Homo erectus. No, they want to come up with their own name. You know, I found Homo charliensis, you know. It's kind of an ego thing that everybody wants to discover something new. But it may well be that a lot of these hominids that have been assigned to different species are actually all part of one species. I mean, when you look at human beings, there's a great variation in what we look like. So Bigfoot could be related to all of those groups.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Sheen or Abe, either of you have a question?
Oh, did we lose Abe?
No, I'm here. I was just waiting for Shane to see if he had a comment. But, yeah, I'm full of questions, guys. You guys know that.
That's what we love about you, man.
Good deal. All right. Well, through your research, Lisa, what would you consider that you have found that could or would be hard evidence linked to Bigfoot being real?
I have found some footprints. And in fact, there are pictures of the 2 footprints I found in Texas in Backyard Bigfoot. And they look almost identical to some of the footprints that have been documented from other places, particularly California. So that to me is pretty good evidence that there's some kind of creature out there that is not a human being.
Have you casted any of them?
No, the ones I found in Texas were in sandy soil that was very fine, about the consistency of talcum powder, and so it wasn't really good for that.
Right.
And I found a possible footprint here in Michigan, but it wasn't as good as the one in Texas, so it wasn't as clear.
Say, you got me thinking, do you know the trick for casting in sand?
Not me.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I'm not an expert on that.
you take a hairspray, extra hold, all-day hold, or heavy-duty hairspray, and not the aerosol can, but the pump, and you spray around there so it sets into the sand and creates a better hold for casting material, so it won't go all kaput all over the place like if you were to add water or something like that to it. So it just makes the sand a lot more sturdier. Have you ever had anything? Have you ever had anything thrown at you as far as sticks or rocks or anything like that while you were out researching?
No, I have not experienced that myself. I've heard sounds, but I have not had anything thrown at me. Although one time, actually, I was walking in the woods and an apple fell out of nowhere. I don't know if that was thrown at me or if it just fell out of the sky.
Well, let me ask you this. When the apple fell, did it go straight down or did it come from the side?
It went straight down.
Okay. And were there any apple trees?
Yeah, there weren't any apple trees nearby for it to come straight down out of that was the strange part.
Yeah, it is kind of odd.
And I found apples lodged in trees, too, up off the ground, which was also not near apple trees. There are apple trees around, so that was strange.
Besides from hearing vocalizations, have you ever heard any wood knocking or think that you heard wood knocking while you're out doing research? I
heard some sounds that at first I thought were pieces of wood being knocked together, but actually later, by hearing some rocks being knocked together, I decided that that's what it was that I actually heard was some rocks being banged into each other. And that was when I heard something chasing one of my horses one night. Something was chasing him and banging the rocks together, and then I heard it jump over the woven wire fence. It makes kind of twang when something jumps over it.
Is that the incident that happened in north central Texas, Lisa?
Yes, that was in Texas.
Okay.
And I mentioned that in Backyard Bigfoot.
Lisa, we have a couple of questions here in the chat. First one, in any of the tracks you found, did you find any dermal ridges or in any snow prints that you found? Were you able to notice dermal ridges?
No, nothing that I could see in them. The sandy soil that I found a couple of footprints in, it just wasn't the right kind of conditions to preserve some details like that.
And there's another question from Dan. His question is, if Bigfoot is not from Homo erectus or Neanderthal, is there another unknown hominid that you're aware of or you're familiar with?
Well, there are a bunch of different ancient hominids that are known from fossils. Homo heidelbergensis, which I mentioned, which is another good candidate, I think, because it was very stocky. The bones are very large. And there are a number of other hominids that are smaller. So it could be any number of those. There are, of course, Bigfoot of different sizes, so it could be these hominid species are really all the same kind of creature, just different sizes of them, different varieties of them.
Now, the question I have now, if in fact Bigfoot is an ancient hominid, what would you, in your opinion, would be the one thing that has allowed them to survive for such a long time?
Well, I think they're probably well adapted to their environments and to living here on Earth. Human beings are actually not that well adapted to living on Earth. We get hot, we sweat, we can get heat stroke, we get sunburned. In cold climates we get frostbite, we can freeze easily. So actually, Bigfoot may be a lot better adapted to the environment than we are, especially since they have hair, since hair can insulate you from cold but also protect you from heat too. So they may be better adapted than us, and that would help them survive for a long time. Of course, they may also have culture. They may live in some kind of shelter, maybe caves, or maybe they make their own shelters. So that would help them too if they had some kind of social structure and culture to help them survive.
One of the most interesting things I found out about you, Lisa, when I was researching you was, I found out that you say that you found various stone tools in Texas and in Michigan. Could you please tell us about those tools and why you think they were made for a specific purpose?
Well, I started finding some rocks, usually of the same dimensions, of size that fits in a hand, and they're a particular vaguely triangular shape but rounded off, and they look just like some of the stone tools made by ancient hominids. I did a lot of research about evolution when I was writing all of my books, actually. So I started noticing that the pictures in these books about hominids and the tools they made, the pictures of the tools looked a lot like these stones that I had been finding. So I started thinking, maybe they are tools. Maybe they're not just randomly showing up, because quite often they're made of rocks that didn't come from the vicinity of where I found them. They came from somewhere else, further away. So something must have brought them there. So I started thinking, well, maybe they are tools, and that would make sense to me if Bigfoot are hominids, that they would have some kind of tool that they would use.
Oh, interesting. Shane or Abe, do you have any questions?
Abe, go ahead, Abe. I was missed anything in the chat here. Trying to keep up with the chat.
Yeah, say, Lisa, I was wondering, where do you stand? Do you stand on the creationism side or the evolution side?
I'm somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
Or maybe off to the side. I'm not a creationist, but I believe in God, so I think God had some role in it somewhere. I think eventually, no matter what you believe, you have to get back to the idea of a divine creator at some point. You know, you keep going back and back in time and saying, well, this created this, and then this came before that, but eventually you get back to a point where you have to say, well, what started it all? Where did it all start? You know, what came before the Big Bang that created our universe? And I think at that point you have to get back to God or whatever creator you believe in.
Wow, good answer. Do you think that these Bigfoot creatures are more related to human or unknown primate?
Well, humans are technically primates, so I think they are closer to us, though, closer to being humans than to being strictly apes, you know, like gorillas and chimpanzees. I think they're much closer to our side of things, in that they would have culture, you know, and they're very intelligent. So I think they're much closer to us.
Now, the rocks that you have found, were they that you consider tools? I got to ask you, were there any, a while back, were there any tribes of Indians in the same area that you found these rocks that could be possibly leftover tools from when they used to inhabit that area?
Well, they're not the kind of tools that Indians would have used. These are very blocky rocks. They're thick, and they're the kind that are associated with ancient hominids, but they're not generally associated with the North American Indians. They had some more refined tools. These are more primitive. So it's unlikely that they were that, especially since they were always found on the ground. One day there would be nothing there, and the next day I'd walk through the same area and find these rocks laying there. So I don't think they were eroding out of the ground overnight. So
right.
I think they were recently put there.
And do you think that Bigfoot or Sasquatch, if you may, was trying to exchange gifts with you?
Perhaps. Maybe they dropped them there by accident. Maybe they put them there on purpose. It's hard to say for sure, but I think definitely they were put there, and they did not magically appear.
Okay. See, I'm curious. Through your research again, and this goes back to wood knocking. And when you have heard of wood knocks, have you ever responded back with a wood knock? And do you think that the different number of wood knocks mean different things, communicational things to these creatures? Well,
I've only heard the banging sounds that one time when something was chasing my horse. There were a few times when I tried going outside at night and banging some rocks together, but I never heard anything in response.
Okay. Shane, Vic?
Yeah, I got a question here in the chat for you, Lisa. Let's go back here. One of our listeners here, he travels to the UP quite often. He's from that area. He had a question if you're aware of any recent or any reports from the Waters Meat area.
Not recently. I had one from that area a couple of years ago, but the actual sighting had happened quite a few years earlier, back in 1988, actually. Two young boys saw three Bigfoot that looked like two juveniles and an adult because two of them were smaller. So I have that sighting from there, but that's not a real recent one. That happened a while back.
No, I've got a question myself here, and I've pondered this over this past weekend with another gentleman. Due to the quickness or the very short period of time, like when people are out there doing tree knocking or rock knocking, if you will, due to the quick response in some cases, is it in your opinion that it's possible that they are carrying these objects with them at all times, and that's why they're able? Because looking at when how we had to search around for like just the right stick or right rock or something that gave off a good sound when it was hit on a tree. Do you think that they carry these objects around at them all times, or you just think they're that in tune that they're able to find these quite quickly?
Well, they could carry them around, or they could just be more practiced at finding the right objects to use. If they use that kind of thing for communication a lot, then they would probably be able to tell by sight which sticks or rocks would be good for that.
I'm sorry. Is that you, Vic? You had a question?
Yes, I do. Going back to the topic of evolution, Lisa, you said that you think people have 6 common misconceptions about evolution. Please tell our listeners what your thoughts are on this.
The main misconception is that it is an absolute fact, and that there can be no doubt, when in fact the evidence is not that clear about it. There are a lot of holes in the evidence and weaknesses in it that make it not a rock-solid case. Evolution is not a fact that cannot be disputed. So that's probably the biggest misconception. One of the others would be that the fossil record gives us a complete picture of the past, when in fact fossils are very fragmentary and rather rare too. Especially when you're talking about the hominids, it's not that common to find really good hominid fossils that aren't broken into many pieces and scattered around on the land. Fossils are very fragmentary and usually incomplete in that you don't have the whole creature to look at. So that doesn't give us a perfect picture of what happened millions of years ago. It's actually very vague and doesn't provide a lot of evidence to tell us what happened throughout the 4.5 billion year history of our planet. So those are a couple of misconceptions.
Lisa, I had a question now on the same, fossils and that subject. I don't know if you had a chance to see that recent documentary. I believe it was 2 months ago, if I recall, where they discovered a new hominid. I think, if you will, I don't recall the name they've given it, but they had some. Apparently, from what I understood from the documentary, there were some parts about it, or in evolution or whatever, the life tree, if you will, that they discovered with this new find that there were some inaccuracies or misinformation that they previously had or thought. Do you think at some point it's possible that we are going to find a fossil or parts of a fossil that will directly link to Bigfoot, or do you think because they are still living now that that isn't a possibility?
Well, it's possible we already have fossils of Bigfoot. We just call them hominid fossils instead. Since I think they're related to those fossils, it could be, those were hairy creatures too and would be Bigfoot. If you found a fossil of a Bigfoot, how would you know it was a hairy creature if all you have is bones, So it could be we already have their fossils in museums and we just don't realize it.
Yeah, you raised some really good points there. You're listening to Campfire Shadows. Our guest tonight is Lisa A. Shiel, a Bigfoot researcher and author from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you'd like to call in and ask Lisa a question, the call-in number is 347-237-4360. Again, that's 347-237-4360. Speaking of fossils, I found out that you've had a long-time interest in archaeology, Lisa, and that you taught yourself to read and write ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now, how in the world did you teach yourself to do that?
I bought a book.
Wow.
There are actually some good books out there that will teach you how to do that. So I read some of those and studied the inscriptions that I could find in books, the pictures of the hieroglyphic inscriptions to practice on. So that's how I did it.
That's really impressive. And also, too, it looks like we have a caller from the 404 area code that has a question for you. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, I had a question for Lisa. Lisa, I may have missed it, but do you do most of your research during the day, or are you looking just for track signs, or are you out there at night? And if so, are you with other people or just by yourself?
I'm mainly out there in the daytime, but since I live in the area where I do the research, I'm here at night. I'm just in the house, and sometimes I hear things through open windows, strange noises out there. But I do the actual going out in the woods in the daytime.
I mean, are you getting audio recordings at night? I mean, you've got kind of a unique situation there. Just curious.
At the time that I heard strange noises, I didn't have a recorder. Now I keep one by my bed, but since then I haven't really heard anything that was good enough to record, close enough,
Okay. And you're, I think you said you're on 40 acres and you're bordering other forest land, or it's just kind of confined 40 acres and that's...
No, there's a lot of other forest around it.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Well, I did want to make a comment on the knot that you guys were mentioning before. I have my own theory on that, and I think one of you was alluding to that. I had 3 close-range, quote-unquote, knocks, and they sounded like Louisville slugger knocks, and they were from different points. So they must have been by different individuals, and they all sounded about the same, and they were all perfect. Louisville slugger knocks, and I know the trees around the areas that they were in, and I just couldn't imagine that they could have gotten those perfect knocks every time, each of those 3, each time out of those 3 times. And so my theory is somehow they're using their hands. Now, that doesn't take away from the fact that they could be using wood or rocks on wood at times, but I certainly think they could somehow use their hands to give it some kind of a sound like that. All right, just a theory.
That's interesting. That's quite interesting, actually. Because I've heard myself. I've heard people report or believe that obviously we don't necessarily see them making a lot of these vocalizations, but recall hearing like a popping sound. Like when you pop your tongue in your mouth, it makes that like pop sound.
I have heard that too, but I've heard it at a lower decibel level, not to the effect that it would sound like a knock. Now I know somebody that can actually do that. He does it pretty well, and that could certainly be the case. I don't know, but I know for a fact. Well, not for a fact, but I'm fairly certain that those weren't wood knocks. But boy, they were just loud. They were really loud. So, anyway, just a quick comment. And Lisa, I'll let you guys get back to the show. I enjoy listening to the show. Thanks.
Thank you for calling in.
Hey, can you put me on hold and let me listen?
Sure can.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Lisa, we had a question in here. from Watch One. He's actually from Alabama. Have you ever experienced or heard gotten any reports where they heard there was talking or chatter, if you will, at all?
No, I have not personally talked to anybody who's heard something like that. I've read reports of that in other books, but haven't had any personal experience with it or talked to anyone who has.
Okay. All righty. Did you have something to say, Vic?
Yeah, I did. Lisa, not too long ago, there was a writer for some paper or journal that claimed that there were no Bigfoot creatures in the Upper Peninsula because he had been all over the UP, all through the woods and the backcountry, and spent so much time back in there without having found so much as one track. Did you hear about that? Any idea who that might have been?
No, I can't say I've heard about that, but that's something skeptical people like to say. But I rather doubt any one person has been in every inch of the woods in the UP all the time. And if you go out in the woods, there are lots of deer out there, but you might not see any. And if the ground is dry and hard, you won't see that many tracks either. In fact, horses don't leave a lot of tracks when the ground is hard. So not seeing tracks is not that significant when you look at the environment. And also a lot of the woods, especially in an area where I am, has a lot of mossy stuff on the ground. It's kind of like a cushion, and it certainly doesn't hold tracks. So if an intelligent creature like Bigfoot can certainly decide to walk in the areas where it won't leave tracks as opposed to walking through a nice muddy patch.
Mm-hmm. On a different note, in one of the articles you wrote, you stated that you think most Bigfoot researchers pride themselves on their lack of theorizing. Why do you think they would hamstring themselves like that?
Well, I think they just don't want to commit themselves to any particular idea because then they might have to defend it, and they kind of wear it as a badge of courage. Oh, I don't have any theories. You know. But I say, what's the fun of doing the research if you're not going to come up with your own ideas? If you're not going to decide, well, I like this theory, and so I'm going to talk about that because I think it's interesting. You know, it's kind of like, what's the point if you're not going to try and bring the different lines of evidence together into a theory?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Shane?
There was another question for you, Lisa. Do you think Bigfoot will be found soon, and if not, why?
I don't really think it's going to be anytime soon. Simply because they're so elusive. They're obviously good at hiding, and when people see them, I think it's most likely because they want to be seen for whatever reason, whether they just think it's fun to pop out and scare hikers, you know, or whatever. They seem to only be seen when they want to be seen. So I don't think it's likely that we'll have a body, dead or alive, anytime soon.
Just gives me the theory, like I always say, you know, chimpanzees like to throw things at us and annoy us for amusement. Maybe their amusement is just kind of scaring the bejeebies out of us just to see us jump. We do have another question here from Andrew. Do you think it's possible that Sasquatch or Bigfoot bury their dead under rocks or large boulders?
Oh, it's certainly possible. They could do that. If they have some kind of culture, it could be some part of their culture to do that. You know, it could just be for hygiene purposes. You know, they don't want to leave their dead bodies around to rot. There could be a number of reasons why they would do it, and it's entirely possible they do.
Now, there's a question I have that kind of goes along with, their remains or their lack thereof. I've learned over, in certain areas anyway, like the northeastern part of Wisconsin and some of the more northern areas, they seem to have they seem to be drawn to cemeteries or burial areas, and almost have a sense, the sense that I get from it, it's almost as if they're very protective of these areas, even though it's, you know, it's just like a cemetery burial. It's not their burial. Do you find that, or have you found that in the UP as well, or any sense that that's taking place?
No, I haven't noticed any correlation here in this area, but it's certainly interesting, and it's possible that they recognize that that's a place where the dead are buried. You know, even if it's not their dead, they could recognize that. So it's possible.
Okay. Abe, Rick, you have any other questions?
Rick?
Yeah, I do. Lisa, I think it's hard to deny that we as humans try to humanize almost everything. We even think we see human faces in clouds at times. Do you think it's in our nature to think every shadow we see in the woods is a human-like creature? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, that's something you have to think about when you see something or when you talk to somebody else who has seen something. But I find that, excuse me, most people who've had an experience like that, they go through, well, could it have been this, could it have been that? They kind of go through a list of the usual suspects and maybe some unusual ones too, just trying to figure out what it was, and before they come to the conclusion that maybe it was a Bigfoot. I haven't talked to that many people who immediately leap to the conclusion it was a Bigfoot. I think most people, you know, they would rather have it be something else like a bear, but they go through that list and say, well, it was too tall to be a bear, it was too thin, it wasn't the right shape. So I think most people are likely to eliminate all those possibilities before they go to it's a Bigfoot.
Now, Lisa, I have a question here, or kind of maybe more of a comment than a question, but going further with that, with the whole, you know, human thought or non-human or what have you. I know recently I've noticed that a lot more coming out, and they're in the belief that they're human or a people, if you will. Okay. Now I have my perspective on it is, you know, just based on the physical abilities and so on. That it's difficult for me to fathom them being an actual human or a people in any shape or form. Now, with that being said, would you agree, or in your opinion, would we be doing them if and when they are proven to exist? Do you think it would be more harm to label them as human, knowing all these tree huggers, if you will, out there that always want to humanize everything? Okay. Do you, in your opinion, feel that we would be doing them more harm to label them as human, or should we just label them as hominid and just let them be?
Well, I don't know that it would do harm to call them human, but I don't think it would be very accurate to call them human. There are some pretty hairy people around, but not many of them are as hairy as a Bigfoot.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. I know one particular. Oh, anyway.
You really shouldn't be talking about Brenda like that, but...
Oh, boy.
I do have a question for you, Lisa. Where do you stand on the theory of infrasound?
Well, it's an interesting idea, and it would certainly answer some questions. And there are, of course, other animals that seem to use those kind of low sound waves, like elephants. So it's an interesting idea that is worth looking into, definitely.
Okay. Now, with that being said, what you just said, other animals are capable of doing that. So would you, after saying that, would you lean to these creatures being more animal or more human?
Well, human.
Because as we know, people, we're really not able or capable of creating infrasound, as far as my knowledge is.
Right. I don't know of any people who can do that either. They could probably make a lot of money if they could.
Yeah, wouldn't that be something? And where do you stand? I mean, through your research, have you found? Do you think that these creatures migrate at all? What's your theory on that?
I'm not sure about that. I haven't seen any evidence that they leave in the wintertime. I have found what might have been footprints in the wintertime and some things like that. It's possible that in an area like this where I live that they go deeper into the woods and maybe they retreat into some caves or old mine shafts, which there are a lot of in this area. So they could just move into the deeper areas where there isn't as much snow. So that's a possibility too, or they could leave the area. But I think we just don't have enough evidence at this point to be able to tell whether they migrate or not.
Okay. How would you like to see these creatures being proven of their existence?
What I'd like
there's a lot of people that say they don't leave them let be. They've been doing good on their own for thousands of years. There's people out there that say they need to be protected, and and to be protected, they had to be proven. How would you like them to be proven? To prove to the world, the outside of the Bigfoot community, that these creatures are real?
Well, I'm not convinced that it's important to prove they exist. For me personally, that's not one of my goals to prove they exist. I just have fun looking into it and reading about it and talking to other people who have had experiences. I find that to be interesting, and it's not real important to me that the scientific community accept it. And I think if that's your goal, you're looking at a really tough uphill climb to get that done. Because even if you had a body, they might still look at it and say, oh, that's nothing. You obviously faked that. They might not even take the time to look at it closely because they don't want it to be real.
Lisa, we have a question here from Bigfoot 24/7. The question is, are we looking for Bigfoot in the right way?
Well, that's a good question to ask. As far as big expeditions with a lot of people on them, I think that is probably not the right way to go. I mean, most animals are going to run away if there's 20 or 30 people tromping around the woods, especially when they've got their flashlights and their radios that are bleeping and all that sort of thing. Most animals are going to steer clear of you. So I think that is not the right way to go. What is the right way? I mean, that's a question that I don't know that we can answer because we just don't know enough about them to know how's the best way to go about looking for them.
You're listening to Campfire Shadows. Our guest tonight is Lisa A. Shiel, a Bigfoot researcher and author from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. If you'd like to call in and ask Lisa a question, the call-in number is 347-237-4360. Again, that's 347-237-4360. Lisa has a website which can be found at upbigfoot.com. Please tell our listeners what they can expect to find on that website, Lisa.
Well, it's forwards to my Backyard Phenomena blog now, so you'll find all my blog posts there that I've written about Bigfoot and other paranormal topics. So there's a lot to browse there. And there's also information about all my books there for people who are interested in that.
Well, I got another question, Lisa. Do you plan on doing another Bigfoot or Sasquatch book sometime in the near or distant future?
I've been thinking about it. I've got some other projects that are coming first, but it's definitely a possibility down the line.
Okay. Shane?
Yeah, Lisa, I was a number of months ago, I came across a website. Apparently the group is from the UP, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but they have, apparently they're a group of hunting guides, very well experienced hunting guides, big game hunters, that has started up a website about offering hunting parties like you would for deer and elk and such, but for Bigfoot. Are you aware of this? And have you? What is your opinion on having such a web, or the fact that it could cause having some kind of group like that?
I have not heard about that one. I'm not sure if that would mean hunting parties as if they want to go shoot a Bigfoot, or if they're just going out to look for them.
Well, according to their website, it's plainly, very clearly stated to hunt them down. As a matter of fact, they were given descriptions of the males, the females, the juveniles, and how to hunt them, where to hunt them, and what the best firearm is to use to get them.
Well, I'm not sure how anybody would know what the best firearm is to shoot a Bigfoot with. Nobody has apparently done that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be a little leery of somebody who's claiming to know all that about Bigfoot personally.
Okay. Well, I was just curious if maybe you had knowledge of the group or the website.
No, I've not heard about that.
Oh, okay. All righty. Hey, Vic, you have any questions?
I got a question, and it's an Andy Drew question. Lisa, if you were given a countless amount of money to research these creatures, where would you research, and how would you go about doing it?
Well, as I said before, I don't think that anybody really knows the best way to do it, so it's all kind of a crapshoot. I mean, people have tried the game cameras. In fact, I have a couple of those out in the woods, but I have yet to get one of a Bigfoot or of a mountain lion, even though I've seen a mountain lion here. So that doesn't seem to work real well. Going out and sitting in the woods doesn't seem to work real well. So I'm not really sure what is the best way to go about that, no matter how much money you've got to spend.
Right.
Now, Lisa, there's another question in the chat, and I think I want to take this one a little bit further, but the question in the chat is, why can't we track Bigfoot?
Well, I think, first of all, because they're very intelligent, and they probably know when they're being tracked and know how to put us on the wrong trail. And plus, it depends what kind of conditions you're searching in, the ground conditions, whether you would be able to see tracks good enough to follow them for very far. So there's a lot of factors that go into that.
Now, if you I got to ask. I mean, I've done a lot of hunting in my time. I've used hounds. I've used different types of breeds of dogs. Why does it seem, in your opinion, that even using canine support, and not necessarily to hunt them down and kill them, but just to help, to aid in trying to locate where they're at, why, in your opinion, do you think it seems so difficult? It almost seems, now correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like their dogs themselves, even extremely well-trained, good hunting dogs, seem to have difficulty tracking them, whereas they could find just about anything else anywhere in the woods.
Well, it seems like dogs might be a little afraid of them. So it could be when they catch that smell, they don't really want to follow it. There have been times when my dogs have started sniffing the air, but they don't really try and follow any scent, even though they like to do that when they're out for walks. They like to catch a scent and follow it. There have been times when they smelled something that they didn't seem interested in following.
Now, okay, see, that's interesting because, we have a lot of, like, your law enforcement has canine units that are, seem to be extremely aggressive. They're very, obedient as far as commands. Would you say that even with dogs that probably have never experienced one, that are extremely well trained, like canine units, do you believe that they would probably be less likely to track them as well, or do you think that would be a different type of situation?
Well, I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience with those kind of dogs, the police dogs. But if there's something about the smell that disturbs them, it could be it's just so disturbing to any dog that they wouldn't want to follow it.
Okay. Any other questions, Vic, Abe?
Yeah, my question kind of falls in line with the question that Mizzou Squatchin asked in the chat. Their question was, how many calories do you think Sasquatch creatures have to consume per day during winter months, Lisa?
Oh, I would have no idea about that.
Without knowing much about them.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, we just don't know enough about them for anybody to be able to say with any certainty that kind of thing about them.
You definitely wouldn't be alone, Lisa, when you said that you are open to the idea that they don't necessarily migrate out of cold climate areas, such as where you live in the wintertime. If they didn't do that, though, that really does pose a lot of big challenges for them to be able to overcome to make it through the wintertime. Not only are they looking at the warmth issue, but they'd have to be able to sustain themselves over the wintertime, since it's a very good bet that they don't hibernate the way that bears do. Any opinion, since hair doesn't insulate nearly as well as what fur does, I know they can obviously go and find an area that offers pretty good shelter, such as a cave system, but do you have any opinions on what they might do to help conquer the sustenance issue, being able to eat enough to survive? Do you think they stash food away, or what's your take on that?
Well, there are, in my area in particular, there are a lot of deer around in the wintertime, and there are the snowshoe hares around, so there's actually quite a bit of wildlife out there that could be eaten. And, of course, there are humans who live in very cold climates who manage to survive, and other animals that do that. So if they have always lived in the cold climates, then they're probably well adapted to live there and know how to survive and are physically able to survive.
That makes sense. One thing that would be working against them is if they're nearly as smart as what we think that they are, then they've got a sizable brain, the same way that what we do. A big brain like that does require quite a few calories to sustain it every day. If you couple that to the fact that they have so much body mass, then that just makes the problem even worse. They have to be able to find that much more food to be able to stay alive throughout the winter time. I'm not saying that they wouldn't be able to overcome those obstacles. I'm just saying that they'd really have to have things worked out to be able to stay in a cold climate area throughout the winter time.
Right, well, I'm sure they would know all the tricks to use to survive. There are a lot of large animals that live in cold climates that find a way to survive. So, and humans have managed to find plenty of food to eat in the wintertime before the era of, food being packaged in stores for us.
Makes sense. Well, guys, it's about time to wrap this show up. In closing, Shane, do you have any last points you'd like to make?
Well, I'd just like to say I truly appreciate you coming on to the show, Lisa. And I think you bring up a lot of good points, very interesting. And being close to my own backyard, it's kind of pleasant to hear that somebody else is nearby out there too. But I do, like I said, we do appreciate coming on, and I hope to maybe have you back on again in the future if you'd be willing to.
Oh, sure. It's been fun.
Yeah, we'd definitely love to have you. Abe, do you have any closing points you'd like to make?
I just want to say thank you tremendously to Lisa for answering all my questions that I did have. It was great talking to you, and I just want to stress the point that caring for these creatures is good and everything, but it's time to start sharing the different research that we have come up from different researchers. And hopefully that will be one way to get us closer to getting to the bottom of things, is by putting all the evidence that we do have and different types of theories, and just start collaborating and hopefully getting down to the bottom of this Bigfoot mystery. And thank you again to Lisa.
Both guys, as always, make really good points. And Lisa would like to give you the most amount of time to make any closing points that you would care to make.
Well, I think I've said just about everything. In an hour and a half.
You have covered a lot of good info, that's for sure. Definitely. Well, we really appreciate you coming, like the guy said. Thank you again so much. And did you say that you would be open to possibly coming back as a guest again sometime?
Oh, sure. Yep.
That's perfect. We would definitely love to have you. Well, to our listeners, thank you for tuning in for another episode of Campfire Shadows. If you have any suggestions or comments you'd like to send our way, please send them to campfireshadows@gmail.com. Again, that's campfireshadows@gmail.com. Well, it's time once again to turn our backs to the campfire and step out into the shadows. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Squatch on.